Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corn, we have chatted about ADHD in a number of episodes, and I mentioned that I've been taking Vyvanse for a number of years now, and it was kind of a turning point for me in my journey because it took me like 3 or 4 years of basically going around in a circle that can be summarized as trying to treat just ADHD and then just taking Lexapro for depression and resisting the idea that I could just find the right balance by just taking both of them instead of either or. And that kind of ended the journey. So I'm happily on this combo for a number of years, and it gives me the daily drive and energy and reliability of focus, which I think is what is key about ADHD treatment. It's not that it's kind of a overnight fix, it's that it's something you can depend upon. Anyway, one thing I'd like to talk about is when we talk about taking stimulant medications like Vyvanse, besides the actual act of plopping a pill into your mouth, we also have to be mindful about what we eat and drink and its effect upon the medication. And particularly in the case of Vyvanse, which is a stimulant and has the power to weaken your appetite and will make getting to sleep problematic because it's a very long-acting drug. We need to be sure of two things, I think. One is not accidentally extending the length of the drug. And I mention this because we often see on medicine bottles, don't take with grapefruit juice, and read about how it's due to these complicated liver enzymes that may interact with medications. It's quite easy to catch yourself in a store, at least here in Israel, where the grapefruit is a justifiably celebrated fruit. I love a great grapefruit as much as the next guy. And then you're wondering, wait, should I not be taking this because of the drug? So firstly, Herman and Corn, and of course we're not want to be extra careful to emphasize that we're not giving any personal medical recommendations on this podcast, just general information for those who are looking to become more informed about the drugs they take. Is there an issue with Vyvanse with grapefruit? And I've heard specifically the same thing about citrus fruits, and the opposite actually, that citrus fruits impair absorption of this. What else might be problematic? We commonly hear to take them like before breakfast to buffer the stomach. So I think that what those of us who take the drug are trying to avoid is the two phenomenons. One is the stretching it out too far thing that I mentioned, and the other one is the crash and burn effect, that it hits you too hard too quickly and it doesn't last long enough. So the drug you get this kind of sometimes intense feeling that you're overstimulated, and then this crash that it just isn't pleasant. So we want to keep that curve, if you look at the blood concentration curve, as gentle as possible. It's nice and even a slope. It gradually levels up during the course of the morning as your brain is firing up, and then tapers off throughout the afternoon and evening, so that by the time you're finished with work, you're kind of already just naturally winding down out of that kind of focus. So kind of emulating the natural curve of someone whose brain provides all this regulated dopamine supply effortlessly. So Herman and Corn, what would you say regarding these two things? And the final part of the picture, of course, being meals. With Vyvanse, it's remarkably easy to skip meals, not intentionally, but just because you forget that you're even hungry. I'm sure no one wants to walk around with 3 alarms on their phone reminding them to eat breakfast, eat lunch, and eat dinner. But what are some maybe less annoying things one might do, and how does that affect the duration of action of the drug and the medication? And final question, sorry again to stuff them all into one here. When we talk about the drug hitting too hard, as I described it, I wonder if sometimes at lower concentrations you actually get better effect, because that feeling of being overstimulated is not only very uncomfortable, but I don't feel like it's good for focus. It kind of pushes you into a more of a alert state than an actually working on stuff state. That question of hyperfixation and hyperfocus, that your focus is there, but it's too rigid. You can't shift away onto other things. So you end up with the opposite problem. So that's what I'd love to chat about, Herman and Corn, in today's episode of My Weird Prompts.
Herman, I was thinking this morning about how much of our daily lives is essentially a series of biological tuning sessions. It is February 18th, 2026, and we are living in an era where we have more data than ever about our own bodies. We wake up, we check our sleep scores, we caffeinate, we track our macros, and for a significant portion of the population, that tuning includes sophisticated neurochemistry in the form of medication.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are absolutely right, Corn. We have moved past the era of just taking a pill and hoping for the best. We are now in the era of precision lifestyle management. It is all about managing that internal chemistry with a high degree of intentionality. When you introduce a powerful tool like a stimulant into the mix, the variables suddenly become much more consequential. You are not just managing your natural energy levels anymore, you are managing a complex pharmaceutical interaction that is influenced by everything you put in your mouth.
Exactly, and today's prompt from Daniel is a deep dive into that exact intersection. Daniel is looking at the impact of diet on stimulant medications, specifically Vyvanse. He is curious about the role of citrus and grapefruit, how meals influence the duration of action and the blood concentration curve, and how to avoid that dreaded crash and burn effect. He also brought up a really sophisticated point about mental rigidity and whether lower concentrations might actually be better for certain types of focus.
This is a fantastic topic because there is a lot of folk wisdom out there that is partially true, but often dangerously misunderstood when applied to different types of stimulants. People tend to lump all ADHD medications together into one big bucket. But the pharmacokinetics of Vyvanse or lisdexamfetamine are actually quite unique compared to something like Adderall or Ritalin. If you treat Vyvanse like it is just a long-acting version of Adderall, you are going to make decisions based on the wrong science.
Let's start with the citrus thing, because that is the one you hear most often in the ADHD community. The advice is almost universal. Do not drink orange juice with your medication. Is that actually true for Vyvanse, or are we just repeating old news?
It is a classic case of a rule that applies to one thing being overgeneralized to another. For traditional amphetamine salts like Adderall, the acidity in your stomach can absolutely interfere with absorption. Adderall is highly sensitive to pH levels. If your stomach environment is too acidic because you just downed a large glass of orange juice or took a high-dose vitamin C supplement, the drug can break down too quickly or simply not be absorbed efficiently into the bloodstream. You end up wasting a portion of your dose before it even gets a chance to work. However, Vyvanse is a prodrug, and that changes everything.
Right. And for our listeners who might have heard the term but do not know the underlying mechanism, a prodrug is essentially an inactive substance that the body has to convert into an active one. It is like a locked box that requires a specific key to open.
Exactly. When you swallow a Vyvanse capsule, it is not actually dextroamphetamine yet. It is lisdexamfetamine, which is dextroamphetamine molecules bonded to an amino acid called L-lysine. This covalent bond is very stable in the acidic environment of the stomach. In fact, the absorption of the prodrug itself is not significantly affected by the pH level of your gastrointestinal tract. It is absorbed as an intact molecule in the small intestine. So, the orange juice you drink at 8 in the morning is not going to kill your Vyvanse dose the way it might with other stimulants.
So, you were saying the orange juice warning is less relevant for Vyvanse users during that initial absorption phase? That is going to be a relief for a lot of people who miss their morning fruit.
Precisely. The conversion from the inactive prodrug to the active dextroamphetamine does not even happen in the stomach, and it does not even happen primarily in the liver. It happens in the red blood cells. Enzymes in your blood, specifically aminopeptidases, cleave that lysine bond, releasing the active medication at a steady rate. This is why Vyvanse is known for having a smoother onset. Your blood's capacity to convert the drug acts as a natural bottleneck. You cannot rush the process by changing what is in your stomach.
That is fascinating. It is almost like a built-in time release mechanism that is biological rather than mechanical. But what about grapefruit? That is a different beast entirely because it usually interacts with liver enzymes, right? I know grapefruit is the forbidden fruit for a lot of different medications.
You have been doing your homework, Corn. Yes, grapefruit is famous in the medical world for inhibiting an enzyme called CYP3A4 in the liver. This enzyme is responsible for metabolizing a huge range of drugs, from statins to certain anti-anxiety medications and even some other ADHD treatments like guanfacine. If you block that enzyme with grapefruit juice, the drug stays in your system longer and at much higher concentrations, which can be dangerous. It is often called the grapefruit juice effect.
Does Vyvanse use that same pathway? If I have a grapefruit half for breakfast, am I accidentally turning my medication into a rocket ship?
Not really. Amphetamines are primarily metabolized through a different pathway involving an enzyme called CYP2D6, and a significant portion is just excreted unchanged in the urine. So, while grapefruit is a major red flag for many medications, it does not have that same rocket fuel effect on Vyvanse. That said, I always tell people to check with their doctor because everyone's metabolic profile is a bit different, and many people are on adjunct medications that might be affected by grapefruit even if their Vyvanse isn't.
Okay, so if the stomach acid from citrus isn't a huge deal for absorption, and grapefruit isn't a major metabolic blocker, does that mean Daniel can just eat whatever he wants without worrying about the efficacy?
Not quite. There is a second part to the acidity story that happens at the other end of the process, the kidneys. This is where the citrus myth actually has some teeth. While the stomach pH might not affect Vyvanse's absorption, the pH of your urine can significantly affect how fast your body gets rid of the active dextroamphetamine once it is in your system.
Oh, I see. So the entry is fine, but the exit is where the trouble starts. If your urine is more acidic, you flush it out faster.
Exactly. This is a process called renal excretion. Amphetamines are weak bases. When your urine is more acidic, the amphetamine molecules become ionized, which means they get trapped in the urine and cannot be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream through the kidney tubules. If you are consuming huge amounts of vitamin C or highly acidic foods throughout the day, it can acidify your urine, which increases the renal excretion of the amphetamine. It essentially shortens the half-life of the drug.
That leads perfectly into Daniel's question about the crash and burn effect. If you are accidentally accelerating the excretion of the drug, you are likely to feel that drop off much more sharply. You are basically cutting the tail off the curve.
Absolutely. The goal with a long-acting stimulant is a gentle arc, not a cliff. When the medication levels in your blood drop too rapidly, the brain struggles to adjust its dopamine and norepinephrine levels back to baseline. That is when you get the irritability, the brain fog, and the physical exhaustion. If you were drinking soda and taking vitamin C supplements all afternoon, you were essentially telling your kidneys to dump the medication as fast as possible, leading to a much harder crash at 5 in the evening.
So, let's talk about meals. Daniel asked how meals influence the duration and the concentration curve. Does a big breakfast help or hinder? I have heard some people say you should take it on an empty stomach for maximum punch, while others swear by a high-protein start.
The research on Vyvanse specifically shows that taking it with a high-fat meal can delay the time it takes to reach peak concentration, what we call the Tmax, by about 1 hour. However, it does not change the total amount of the drug that gets absorbed, which is the area under the curve, or AUC.
So it does not make it less effective. It just makes it kick in a bit more slowly? It shifts the whole curve to the right.
Right, and for many people, that is actually a massive benefit. A slower onset can mean a more gradual transition into that focused state, rather than feeling like a light switch was flipped. If you take it on an empty stomach, you might hit that peak faster and harder, which can lead to jitters or that overstimulated feeling Daniel mentioned. But the real secret to avoiding the crash is not just about the breakfast you eat when you take the pill. It is about the nutritional support you provide throughout the day.
I suspect you are going to talk about protein. You have a bit of a reputation for being the protein evangelist when it comes to brain health.
I will wear that badge proudly. Protein is crucial for 2 reasons. First, the neurotransmitters that stimulants are trying to manage. Dopamine and norepinephrine are actually synthesized from amino acids like tyrosine and phenylalanine, which you get from protein. If you are not giving your brain the raw materials it needs, the stimulant is like a driver pressing the gas pedal on an empty tank. You are asking the brain to release more dopamine, but the cupboard is bare.
That is a great analogy. It is also notoriously difficult to eat on these medications because they are such effective appetite suppressants. I know many people who realize at 4 in the afternoon that they have had nothing but coffee and a single piece of toast since they woke up.
And that is the recipe for a catastrophic crash. When your blood sugar is low and your brain is out of amino acids, the moment the stimulant begins to wane, you are going to hit a wall. One of the best strategies I have seen is what people call mechanical eating. Even if you are not hungry, you eat small protein-rich snacks throughout the day. A handful of almonds, a protein shake, some Greek yogurt, or even just a few slices of turkey. It keeps the blood sugar stable and provides the precursors for dopamine. This trickle feed of nutrients prevents the brain from entering a state of emergency when the medication wears off.
I want to pivot to the last part of Daniel's prompt, which I think is really insightful and often overlooked in clinical discussions. He mentioned the idea that lower concentrations might actually provide better focus by avoiding overstimulation and hyperfixation. He called it mental rigidity. This is something I've noticed people talk about more frequently, the difference between being productive and just being stuck on a task.
Daniel is hitting on a very sophisticated concept in neurobiology called the inverted U-shaped curve, or the Yerkes-Dodson law. This is the idea that there is an optimal level of arousal, in this case dopamine and norepinephrine for cognitive function. Too little and you are distracted, unmotivated, and seeking stimulation. But too much and you lose cognitive flexibility. You move past focused and into locked in.
It is the Goldilocks zone of executive function. Not too little, not too much, but just right.
Exactly. When you are in that overstimulated state, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for high-level decision-making, impulse control, and switching between tasks, becomes too dominant in a very narrow way. You might spend 4 hours perfectly color-coding a spreadsheet that does not actually need to exist, while ignoring the urgent deadline that does. You are focused, but you are not productive in a meaningful sense.
I have definitely seen that. It is like the brain loses its meta-awareness. You are so focused on the doing that you forget to ask why you are doing it. You become a very efficient machine with a broken steering wheel.
Right. That mental rigidity is a sign that the dose might be too high or that the blood concentration has peaked too sharply. This is why Daniel's point about lower concentrations is so interesting. Sometimes a lower dose allows for enough background noise in the brain to remain creative and adaptable, while still providing enough of a boost to stay on task. You want to be able to hear the phone ring or realize you are hungry. If the medication is too strong, you become a zombie to the task at hand.
So, if someone feels that rigidity, it might not be that the medication isn't working, but that it's working too well in one specific direction. It is overcalibrated.
Precisely. In the clinical world, we sometimes call this emotional blunting or zombieing. You are functional, but you are not you. You are a hyper-focused version of yourself that lacks spontaneity and emotional range. Adjusting the diet to smooth out that concentration curve can help. For instance, if you take the medication with a solid, balanced meal, you might avoid that sharp peak that pushes you over the top of the inverted U into the zone of rigidity. You stay on the upward slope of the curve where you have focus but still have your personality.
It sounds like the crash and the rigidity are two sides of the same coin. They are both results of a concentration curve that is too volatile. One is the peak being too high, and the other is the drop being too steep.
That is a perfect way to put it, Corn. You want a plateau, not a mountain peak. And interestingly, hydration plays a massive role here too. Stimulants can be dehydrating, and even mild dehydration can impair cognitive flexibility. If you are stuck on a task and feeling rigid, sometimes just drinking 16 ounces of water and eating a small snack can reset the system enough to let you switch gears. Dehydration makes the blood more concentrated, which can theoretically affect how you perceive the medication's intensity.
I think it is important to mention that for many people, the fear of the crash leads them to want a higher dose, thinking the medication is wearing off too soon. But if the crash is caused by a rapid drop from a very high peak, a higher dose might actually make the crash worse. It is a vicious cycle.
That is the stimulant trap. You think you need more to stay up longer, but you are actually just increasing the height of the cliff you have to fall off later. This is why the timing of meals is so vital. If you can use a high-protein lunch to provide a steady stream of nutrients, you might find that the effective duration of the medication feels longer because the descent is more gradual. You are essentially building a ramp for the medication to slide down, rather than letting it drop off a ledge.
We have talked a lot about the theory, but let's get specific for Daniel. If he wants to optimize his day on Vyvanse, what does the ideal nutritional day look like? Let's walk through a 24-hour cycle.
Well, assuming he wakes up and takes his medication around 7 or 8 in the morning, I would suggest a breakfast that includes at least 20 to 30 grams of protein and some complex carbohydrates. Think eggs and whole grain toast or a protein-heavy smoothie with some oats and nut butter. This provides a buffer for the stomach and a slow-release energy source. The complex carbs prevent a mid-morning blood sugar spike and crash, which can mimic the feeling of the medication wearing off.
And he should probably skip the giant glass of orange juice right then, just to be safe with the urinary pH later, right? Even if it doesn't affect absorption, it's better to stay alkaline early on.
Yeah, or at least save it for later in the evening when the medication's primary job is done. Then, around midday, even if he is not hungry, he needs a lunch that is high in lean protein, chicken, fish, tofu, or beans. This is the refueling stage. If he starts feeling that mental rigidity in the early afternoon, say around 2 o'clock, that is a signal to check his hydration and maybe have a small piece of fruit. The natural sugars can provide a quick brain boost without the acidity being a major factor at that point.
What about the evening? How do you handle the transition when the medication is truly leaving the system and you want to avoid being a cranky mess at the dinner table?
That is when you can actually lean into the vitamin C. Some people use vitamin C supplements or orange juice in the evening specifically to help clear the remaining amphetamine from their system faster so they can sleep. It is like an off switch. If you have a high-acid dinner or a glass of juice at 7, you are helping your kidneys flush the last of the dextroamphetamine. And a dinner with healthy fats and magnesium-rich foods, like spinach, pumpkin seeds, or almonds, can help relax the nervous system. Magnesium is a natural NMDA receptor antagonist, which can help reset some of the tolerance and overstimulation from the day.
It is almost like you are using diet to shape the drug's effect. You are using protein to build the neurotransmitters, complex carbs to steady the energy, and then acidity at the end of the day to help the landing. You are the pilot of your own neurochemistry.
Exactly. The medication is the engine, but the diet is the fuel and the flaps on the wings. You can use them to smooth out the turbulence. If you just let the engine run without any fuel or steering, you are going to have a rough flight.
I find the mental rigidity point so compelling because it changes the definition of effective. We often think more focus equals better, but in a modern work environment, you need to be able to pivot. If you are so focused on a task that you miss 3 important calls and forget to pick up your kids from school, the medication is not helping you. Manage your life. It is just narrowing it. It is replacing one problem, distractibility, with another inflexibility.
That is a deep insight, Corn. True executive function is not just about the ability to focus. It is about the ability to prioritize and shift. If a lower dose or a more buffered absorption curve through diet allows you to keep that pivotability, then that is the superior therapeutic outcome. We have to move away from the more is better mindset with stimulants. The goal is the minimum effective dose that allows for maximum life flexibility.
It reminds me of some of the discussions we had back in episode 512, when we were looking at the long-term effects of stimulants on cognitive flexibility. There is a real risk of becoming over-automated if you don't manage the dosage and the lifestyle factors around it. We saw studies suggesting that chronic overstimulation can actually lead to a decrease in creative problem-solving over time.
I remember that one. We talked about how the brain can start to rely on that external dopamine spike and lose some of its natural switching mechanisms. Keeping the dose at that just enough level, what Daniel was asking about, is likely better for long-term brain health and adaptability. It keeps the brain's own systems engaged rather than completely overriding them.
So, to summarize for Daniel, the citrus thing is real, but mostly affects how fast you get rid of the drug via the kidneys, not how you absorb it in the stomach. Grapefruit is a non-issue for Vyvanse specifically, though it matters for other meds. Meals are your best friend for smoothing out the curve and avoiding the crash, with protein being the absolute MVP. And that mental rigidity is a real sign that you might be pushing past the Goldilocks zone and into a state of cognitive over-arousal.
Spot on. And I think it is worth mentioning that for anyone listening who is struggling with these effects, it is so important to keep a log. We are in February 2026. Use one of those AI integrated health trackers or just a simple notebook. Write down what you ate, when you took your dose, and how you felt at 2 in the afternoon. It is hard to see these patterns in the moment because your brain is literally in the middle of the chemical shift. But after a week, it becomes very obvious if, say, every Tuesday when you skip lunch, you end up feeling like a zombie by 3 o'clock.
That data-driven approach is so helpful. It takes the mystery out of it. You realize you are not failing at your medication. You're just experiencing a predictable biological reaction to a lack of fuel or a shift in pH. It moves the conversation from what is wrong with me to how do I adjust my protocol.
Exactly. We are complex biological machines, and we didn't come with an owner's manual. We have to write our own through observation, a bit of science, and a lot of trial and error. Daniel is already ahead of the game just by asking these questions.
Well, Herman, I think we have covered a lot of ground here. It is a great reminder that these medications don't exist in a vacuum. They are part of an ecosystem that includes everything from the water we drink to the stress levels we carry. Even something as simple as a 15-minute walk can change how your body processes these chemicals by increasing blood flow and oxygenation.
It really is all connected. And I hope this gives Daniel and all our listeners who might be on a similar journey some practical tools to make their day-to-day experience a bit smoother. ADHD management is a marathon, not a sprint, and your nutrition is the hydration station along the way.
Definitely. And hey, if you've been listening to my weird prompts for a while and you find these deep dives helpful, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who might be looking for this kind of information. We are trying to build a library of these owner's manuals for the human brain.
It really does help. We love seeing the feedback and knowing which topics are hitting home. We have seen a huge uptick in questions about neurooptimization lately, and we want to keep providing the best science-backed answers we can.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive of all 677 episodes, plus our contact form if you want to send in your own questions, or you can just email us directly at show@myweirdprompts.com. We read every single one, even if we can't get to all of them on air.
We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you get your audio fix. Check the show notes for links to some of the studies we mentioned regarding lisdexamfetamine and renal excretion.
Thanks for joining us for another exploration. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Stay curious, keep tracking those variables, and keep tuning that internal chemistry. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. See you in the next episode.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.